There have been Grand Prix that have gone down in history for the constant twists and turns of the epic duels for the breathtaking overtakes. Here's the race we recount today that has nothing to do with any of this. We could call it the worst race in F1 history. To understand exactly what happened that day, we have to go back to the end of the 2004 season. Ferrari again dominated the championship. Michael Schumacher nipped in the bud any ambition of the opponents, and this probably did not go down very well with Bernie Ecclestone, who was looking for any possible way to increase the spectacle in Formula One, and certainly, a season with the World Championship already decided after a few races were not exactly ideal to have appealed to an audience. In 2005, so the FIA and introduced a radical change of regulation with drastic reductions in aerodynamics and the obligation to use only one engine every 2 GP. But if these 2 points were dictated by the fact that the performance of the cars in 2004 was reaching such a level that even threats to the safety and security of the drivers themselves loomed on the horizon, the same cannot be said of the third point that I introduced, in fact, the prohibition of changing tires during pit stops in a Grand Prix. Except of course for exceptional cases such as bad weather or security problems. To give you an idea, this meant that a set of tires had to run about 350 kilometers compared to 100 kilometers the year before. It was the time of the celebrated war between tire manufacturer Bridgestone and Michelin. The Japanese manufacturer in the year 2004 had developed the construction of a tire with textile fibers instead of steel, which gave it a great advantage in terms of performance at the expense, however, of durability. In fact, races at that time consisted of at least 2 pit stops because qualifying was done with the fuel load needed for the first stint of the race. Ferrari and Bridgestone took this concept to extremes, going so far as to win a French Grand Prix even with 4 pit stops. Michelin, on the other hand, staked everything on the incredible durability of its tires. In fact, some teams even managed to finish a Grand Prix without even changing tires once in the pit. It was clear, then, that the regulatory change was designed to try to put the Bridgestone tires in trouble. As on many other things, he was right because Bridgestone had to completely revise the way it built its tires, looking with its engineers for solutions that focused on reliability and distance at the expense of performance. There is also another premise to be made. Ferrari was the only top team fitted with Bridgestone tires. This meant that it had to shoulder all the work of developing and testing the new tires, while Michelin had been able to divide this phase over many more teams, thus managing to have a much broader spectrum of results. We then arrive at the beginning of the 2005 season, in which the inevitable happened. The Michelin-tired cars dominated and the Ferraris trudged through each race. When the teams landed in Indianapolis for the 9th race of the season, Fernando Alonso was dominating the championship with only one rival, Kimi Raikkonen, however, in addition to fighting against the Spaniard, had to deal with the reliability problems of his Mclaren Mercedes. The Ferraris have never been in the fight for the top positions and are struggling to find the podium. The first practice sessions begin on Friday, and the inkling is beginning to set in that it will not be a Grand Prix like the others. The third Toyota driver, Ricardo Zonta, comes out of the pits and after a few kilometers suffers the burst of the left rear tire, silting up without consequences. At that moment, it doesn't look like anything serious. It could have been debris, like the defective tire. The inkling that it might be more serious than you think comes in the afternoon of the same day. Again a Toyota, this time, however, with Ralf Schumacher. The German is driving down the overpass before the finish line when once again the left rear tire fails and the Toyota crashes violently into the wall. Ralf Schumacher comes out a little dazed, but fortunately without consequences. However, doctors deny him the chance to take part in Sunday's race as a precaution, so Toyota replaces him with third driver Ricardo Zonta. The 2 blowouts at the same tire, however, cannot be random. In addition, other teams such as Sauber, for example, have noticed a worrying drop in tire pressure after every few laps of use. The alarmed Michelin meets to analyze data and the performance of its tires. This leads up to Saturday morning practice, in which only 2 Michelin tires, Montoya and Coulthard, set a valid time. There is no telling what is going on. Despite Michelin's failure to provide answers yet and the uncertainty hovering in the paddock, Saturday's qualifying runs smoothly with Jarno Trulli managing to give Toyota its first pole position in history, ahead of Kimi Raikkonen and Fernando Alonso, who finishes 6th between the 2 Ferraris. In the evening, however, lightning strikes, and Michelin issues a historic statement. Following analysis of Ralf Schumacher's accident on Friday, Michelin does not guarantee the integrity of its tires for this race. In fact, The French manufacturer had not yet fully grasped the true nature of the problem, but the more than well-founded suspicion was that the epicenter of the issue was the infamous turn 13, which placed a very cross stress on the tires. Moreover, at that point the track had been resurfaced, making in ruts in the asphalt, making the performance very different from previous years. But there are also serious doubts about the presence of manufacturing defects in the batch of tires shipped from Indianapolis. From this point on in the circus, it is a constant flurry of confusion, misunderstandings, borderline absurd proposals, and political pressure. The race moves from the tarmac to the negotiating tables. The night passes in endless negotiations during which several proposals arise. The first was to use a different specification, specifically the one used at the Spanish Grand Prix. But there was still the problem that they were not tires that had been tried on the American track and therefore did not completely eliminate the risk of failure. The second proposal that came up was to allow Michelin-tired teams the option of changing tires every 7 to 8 laps. The third proposal, on the other hand, was to have a chicane in turn 13, the parabolic, so as to lessen the stress on the tires, perhaps by having Bridgestone tires start in the first rows or by assigning the points given them only to these teams. Charlie Whiting states, "To change the rules to help some teams with problems resulting from their own equipment failures would be breaking the rules and highly discouraging to those teams who came to Indianapolis with the right set of tires." At 10 a.m. Sunday, there was a meeting to decide the fate of the United States Grand Prix. There was Tony George, president of the circuit, representatives of Michelin, the team principals of all the teams, Bernie Ecclestone, and by telephone connection FIA president Max Mosley. Flavio Briatore, team manager of the Michelin-tired Renault, also commented on the issue. "Whatever has to be done for the safety of the drivers, it has to be done. Otherwise, we refuse to race." Luca Colagiani, the spokesman for Ferrari, states, "The Michelin tire problem does not concern us. Michelin asked the federation to change the tires, and the federation said no. That it is unfortunate for Formula One is clear, but it does not affect us directly. In Barcelona, we had tire problems with 2 punctures for Michael. After the second one, the car came into the pits and did not come out. After the analysis, we took a step back in the evolution using safer tires. With about an hour to go before the start of the race, it seems that an agreement has been reached so that the Grand Prix can run smoothly. In fact, all the teams have agreed to put in a chicane in turn 13, even Jordan and Minardi, who are Bridgestone tires. Ferrari, however, with Jean Todt strongly objected, saying, "It's the Michelin tires that had to adjust by running the elevated at low speed." What would have been the reaction if we in Bridgestone had asked not to run a race because for one reason or another it was putting us in trouble? There are rules, and the rules apply to everyone. They even go so far as to think about installing an electronic speed limiter on the single-seaters. A possibility immediately rejected by all the drivers. It's 1 p.m., though, and by now the GP is looming. When in doubt, some circuit officials begin to install the chicane in turn 13. Ecclestone tried to mediate, went to Briatore, and asked him to do at least 5 laps and then retire. The answer was normally, "No way." Toyota also gave the same answer. Meanwhile, Ferraris were the first to line up on the grid, followed by Jordan and Minardi. Michelin-tired teams also lined up on the grid, although there is still no agreement. Meanwhile, the temporary chicane has been removed. The grandstands are full, TVs around the world are connected, and there is no official communication. At 2 p.m. sharp, the mechanics take off from the grid and the cars go off for the reconnaissance lap, during which a team radio from Coulthard is heard saying, "Guys, I would like to race, let me know." The glimmer of hope, however, is immediately cut short by a team radio received from Fernando Alonso. "Back to the box, we're pulling out." The spectacle from then on is tragicomic. All Michelin-tired cars re-enter the pit lane, while Ferrari, Jordan, and Minardi remain on the grid. Speaking of Minardi, the single-seaters took part in the race anyway, despite the fact that owner Paul Stoddart announced that he would withdraw his cars out of solidarity with the other teams. Jordan, however, violated the agreement to leave only the 2 Ferraris on the track, and so Minardi also took to the track, probably both of them enticed by the unmissable chance to score points. Amid deafening booing from the bewildered public, the red lights came on 5 times and then went out for the most absurd start ever. It is the lowest moment in Formula One history. The race is surreal, to say the least. The two Ferraris run away undisturbed. While behind there is a minimum of the struggle between the Jordans and the Minardis, but from the stands comes everything. Objects were thrown onto the track by the enraged crowd. Among them is a tin can that is hit hard by Rubens Barrichello. While everyone is focused on what is happening in the paddock, the race has a sudden jolt. Schumacher, in fact, during his first stop, had a delay in refueling and ended up behind Barrichello. The German recovered and after his second stop came out of the pit lane just as the Brazilian arrived. The two brushed against each other and Barrichello went out onto the grass, losing his lead. Can you imagine what would have happened if they had both gone out due to contact? In all this also comes Bernie Ecclestone's statement. In the good old days, I would have forced everyone to race anyway. Just when we were building the image of Formula One in America, now everything is ruined. The race ends with Schumacher winning ahead of Barrichello. Third, Thiago Monteiro in the Jordan. Fourth, Karthikeyan, fifth, Albers, and sixth, Friesecker will be the last points in history for both Jordan and Minardi. On the podium, the Ferrari drivers do not celebrate out of respect for the public. Instead, Thiago Monteiro celebrates as if he had won the championship. But then again, how can we blame him? He had his race fit. The consequences of this race were many and drastic. Indianapolis raced until 2007, and then for another long 5 years, Formula One would never return to America. Michelin had to refund all tickets purchased by spectators and then give away another $20,000 for the 2006 race. This whole little joke cost Michelin about 10 million euros. This gesture by no means erased the embarrassment made in World Vision in Indianapolis. At the end of 2006, Michelin withdrew from Formula One forever, and so the following year the FIA decided to adopt the one-make tire. From that moment, Formula One changed forever.